Jing Xiuquan was short and thin, but he looked a bit strong. His expression was that of annoyance at being disturbed, hiding a trace of uneasiness. I walked up and apologized. Sorry, uncle, we had a little trouble here recently. The leader was afraid of the bad influence, so he sent us to visit around and ask if anyone had seen any unfamiliar strangers. We disturbed you, we will pay attention next time. Jing Xiuquan turned his eyes away and said, What people? I don't have any impression. I said enthusiastically, Uncle, how long have you built this house? Did the government build it for you? Do you live well here? It's been more than a year, and it's okay to live. He said and wanted to close the door. If you don't have anything, don't bother. I couldn't find a chance to get in, but I was more sure that this person had a ghost on him, otherwise why would he lie about the time of the house renovation? My eyes turned around and I saw a sink at the door of his house. The color in the sink seemed a bit wrong. I immediately decided not to entangle anymore, thanked him with a smile, and let Jing Xiuquan close the door. Before I could confirm whether the old man was still peeping, I poked a colleague next to me and signaled him to take a sample while I was blocking in front. After leaving the bamboo forest, my colleague told me that there was not only dark red dirt in the sink, but also a few long hairs. That night, we immediately started overnight DNA comparison. The dark red soil could not extract DNA, but the few long hairs, after comparison, belonged to two girls, one of whom was Li Tong. Two girls, we didn't dare to think anymore, and immediately drove back to the village. The cottage in the bamboo forest was quiet. The police went up and knocked for a while, but there was no response. They kicked the door open without hesitation. The first colleague who rushed in quickly exclaimed, Come here, we found the first crime scene. On the left side of the yard, there was a storage room that had been locked all the time. The whole scene was almost not cleaned up. Bloody ropes, hammers and other tools were thrown on the ground, bloodstains were everywhere, dragging, vomiting, splashing, and in the high temperature of summer, they had already emitted a stench, attracting countless insects. The process of the crime that I had seen on the two children's corpses was reappearing in front of me at this moment, binding, beating, kicking. We found him. Jing Xiuquan ran away, but he didn't have many places to go. It didn't take half a day, and the police blocked him in a cave in the back mountain and took him to the interrogation room. This ordinary-looking old man kidnapped and killed two children under 14 years old. All the police were tense, preparing countless interrogation strategies and evidence. It was not difficult to convict him, but no one didn't want to ask why. Jing Xiuquan's words made all these preparations go to waste. I did it, just shoot me, don't want anything else. Jing Xiuquan confessed, but he refused to say a word about his motive for the crime. According to the villagers, Jing Xiuquan's family was originally an outsider. He used to be a carpenter and a barefoot doctor when he was young, but he was petty and vengeful, and had a bad reputation. One day he suddenly made some money, built a house, and became upright, and his relationship with the villagers also eased. His method of suddenly getting rich, according to the Luoyang shovel found under his bed, we seem to have some guesses. After getting rich, Jing Xiuquan soon married and had children, and lived a good life. His son even went to work in a first-tier city. But later his wife got sick, spent a lot of money on treatment but still died, and then he became very lonely and lived alone in the bamboo forest. He never left his house, let alone went to Baigua village 3 kilometers away, or had a grudge with the Li family. Some people wondered, could he be a pervert, randomly abducting and killing children, and not even remembering what he did or how he did it? But I have seen the wounds on the two children's bodies. Killing the girl, the hammer aimed at her cheekbones and eyes, to make her watch herself being disfigured. Killing the boy, the hammer aimed at his mouth, to make him shut up. Every hammer, the purpose and emotion were very clear. I insisted that this could not be done without any hatred. The fingerprints, shoe prints, the DNA of another hair in the sink, Jing Xiuquan's phone and interpersonal relationships, multiple lines were advancing urgently at the same time. The connection between Jing Xiuquan and the Li family, I thought about it, and suddenly realized that we found Jing Xiuquan because of Wu Qian, right? When we found Wu Qian again, she was shoveling the ground at the door of her house. Looking carefully at this girl, I found that she was indeed different from other girls. She was very thin, and the clothes she wore had patches. When she saw the police, she didn't hide behind her family like other children, but stood there blankly and calmly. The last time we came to her house to find her, we only saw her grandfather smoking at the door. Her grandmother impatiently asked us, "Is it that dead girl who caused trouble outside? I'll kill her when she comes back." After learning that it was just an inquiry, she went into the house and closed the door indifferently. It was a passerby who told us that Wu Qian was at school, and we found her. This time, as soon as we entered the door, Wu Qian's grandmother, who had already received the news, rushed up and pulled the police. We had seen this scene many times before. The parents who cared about their children often hysterically shouted, "You caught the wrong person," and "My child won't do such a thing." But this time the situation was really dumbfounding, because this grandmother said, "No, you take her away. Who will do the work for me?" We took Wu Qian away in the midst of crying and shouting. As she left, Wu Qian turned her head and said calmly to her grandmother, "Grandma, don't worry, I'll come back to cook at night." Sitting in the interrogation room, Wu Qian shed tears after saying a few words. She said that she did know Jing Xiuquan. This old man often set up a stall at the school gate, and he was very nice and would give her snacks. Later Jing Xiuquan told her that there were more delicious things at home, and asked her to take his car home. Wu Qian said that she had never met anyone who was so good to her. During the previous visit, many villagers told us about Wu Qian's family situation. They always used a very regretful and evasive expression, and sighed with pity. Wu Qian's father had been in jail for theft, and her mother was bought back by her grandmother for 5,000 yuan and half a pig. She was often crazy, and later died of dystocia when she gave birth to her brother. But that was not the biggest problem in her family. The most deadly thing in her family was her grandmother, a notorious shrew in the 10 miles and 8 villages. She valued sons over daughters, and Wu Qian had to take care of the family's chores when she was not as tall as the stove. The villagers couldn't stand it and said a few words, and her grandmother glared and said, "Why don't you do it?" Earlier, Wu Qian's family didn't even let her go to school. The village committee did a lot of work to persuade them, but her grandmother still occasionally complained of headaches and fever, and asked her to go back and take care of her. For such a girl, perhaps, Jing Xiuquan really looked like a good person. Wu Qian said that Jing Xiuquan took her home for the first time, stripped off her pants, beat her, and raped her. She only found out later that it was rape. After that, Jing Xiuquan often came to school to look for her, and also asked her to go to his house, giving her some snacks or pocket money every time. She didn't dare to tell the adults about this, until the last time she and Li Tong's siblings were playing with their phones at the door, and they were bumped into by Jing Xiuquan. Jing Xiuquan asked Li Tong's siblings to go home with him. Wu Qian guessed what was going to happen. She said she tried to stop them, but the siblings didn't listen to her, and insisted on going. Her persuasion annoyed Jing Xiuquan, and he took her back home as well. In Jing Xiuquan's house, she watched with her own eyes as Jing Xiuquan killed the siblings. Jing Xiuquan also threatened her that she was involved, and said that if she told anyone, she would not be able to escape. Wu Qian cried as she spoke, saying over and over again, "Uncle and aunt, please save me." Because she was a minor, and a female, there had to be a female officer present at the scene, and the female police who accompanied her couldn't bear to listen and kept wiping their tears. Only I still felt something was wrong. Wu Qian's testimony did not explain what grudge Jing Xiuquan had with the deceased. Jing Xiuquan's testimony was also wrong. We asked him, what was the murder weapon? What did he use to hit the face? He said a stick, and then changed his mouth to a hammer when he saw the police's expression. The few blows to the face with a crowbar were the most vengeful. Would the real killer really not remember? There was a sudden commotion from the technical team. A colleague ran over and said that Jing Xiuquan's phone had been unlocked, and there were 2 videos inside. I guessed a bit, and sneered, did this old thing still take videos of himself killing people? The colleague shook his head and said, he filmed the little girl. I frowned, filmed the little girl? I thought he meant the victim Li Tong. The colleague understood what I meant, and continued to shake his head. He filmed another little girl hitting people. The two videos added up to more than 3 minutes. The first video started with a dark ground, and a man's feet wearing slippers. There was a girl suppressed crying in the background. Then the camera lifted slightly, and you could see a slender figure. It was Wu Qian. She was kicking and stomping on Li Tong, who was lying on the ground. The camera shook and I could see the blood on Li Tong's face, and I also saw Wu Qian's face, a very, very calm face. The interrogation of Jing Xiuquan is still going on. Jing Xiuquan is bent on death and refuses to say anything, and his colleagues are prepared for the long haul and are starting to count a few police officers who can go on shift. I couldn't help but greet my co-workers and walked into the interrogation room. In the interrogation room, Jing Xiuquan's expression from the excitement at first when he resisted arrest, to now completely calm, almost like a deaf person, except for the police told him to look up and he looked up, told him to look down and he looked down. I walked in the door and sat down, asking, "Would you like something to eat?" Another round of interrogation began, and the old cop was the first to throw out a bait. "That little girl in your house, what's her relationship to you?" Jing Xiuquan bristled and raised his head. I realized that this move was effective, and I couldn't help but shoot the bright. "Do you know Wu Qian? Who is she to you? Ah, this little girl just ran over to turn herself in at noon today. Do you know how it is?" Jing Xiuquan's eyes slowly moved to me, but the expression did not change, or like a deaf person. The old cop followed my words and said, "You have nothing to say? Then we'll go ahead and ask her. You'll be locked up first, and so will she." Jing Xiuquan was silent for 2 seconds and suddenly cursed very loudly, "Son of a bitch. You bluffed me." I was a bit surprised and quickly shouted, "Get your attitude right." Jing Xiuquan lowered his head again and stopped talking. I knew that this must be the breakthrough, began to circle around him. "People have explained everything, you still have to shrink here, let the little girl take the blame for you, you are still a person. I see what she said is more true than you, or you also don't pretend, go back, this has nothing to do with you." This conversation went around and around for about 5 or 6 minutes, when Yung Su Quan suddenly turned his face away and dropped a tear. I immediately asked, "Do you want a cigarette?" The old cop slapped me and I still fumbled for a cigarette and handed it to Yung Su Quan. Yung Su Quan took it with difficulty and lowered his head to smoke. A cigarette finished, he sighed, said softly, "That I can have what to do well." According to Jing Xiuquan's confession, he did see Wu Qian at school. "Since my mother-in-law died, I am like a lost soul every day. I can only go to the school entrance to set up a stall to earn some money. One day I was on the side of the road and saw a female doll being chased up and beaten by a few other people, so I rushed over to the little kids and shooed them away. At that time I helped her up. I was shocked. She and my mother-in-law look really special, that eyes, and that mole on the ear, simply identical." Jing Xiuquan said that Wu Qian was the reincarnation of his wife, and that it was his wife who had come back to him. The police asked, "So you had sex with her?" Yung Su Quan is anxious, she's still a little kid. He said that he just stayed with her, usually bringing her food and protecting her from being bullied. Wu Qian in the village is always ostracized, he is very dependent on him. July 26, and Li Tong's siblings after the argument, she sullenly ran to find Jing Xiuquan complained. At that time, she was siblings hit with blood all over the face. Jing Xiuquan said he looked very bad taste, would like to help her, lesson, these 2 children, the results of, too heavy-handed. "This is my fault, and she has nothing to do with, the government can shoot me, but do not find her trouble, I beg you." The police asked, "What is the body of the deceased sperm spots?" Jing Xiuquan speechless. The police then took out a nude photo of a strange girl. "This nude photo, and how do you explain?" In Jing Xiuquan's cell phone, we found a number of different underage girls' nude photos. The background is his home. Whether it was for the sake of reincarnation, or because of psychopathy, there is no doubt that this asshole lured many underage girls in the same way, and I'm afraid that we still need to investigate how many of them were raped in a substantial way. I did not participate in the interrogation of Wu Qian afterwards. I heard from my colleagues that Wu Qian was very difficult to interrogate. They tried to persuade her with reason and emotion, talking about her family, Jing Xiuquan, and even her young age and future, but she was unmoved. It was not until the police mentioned the grandmother of the deceased, saying that she killed an innocent old woman, that Wu Qian suddenly struggled to jump up and hit the wall. After being restrained, she only asked one question: "Can we be released if we pay money?" The police told her no, and Wu Qian muttered, "Why is it okay for my brother to kill someone?" The investigating police told me that they later learned about the incident that Wu Qian mentioned. According to the local police, just last year, Wu Qian's family did have a dispute with someone else. Wu Qian's brother inexplicably pushed down an old lady who was buying vegetables at the market, and the old lady hit her head on a stone and died on the spot. When the police came to the door, Wu Qian's grandmother took the child and rolled around the yard, saying that either the child should be taken to jail, or she would hang herself to pay for the life. Wu Qian's brother was only 5 years old at the time, and it was pushing not murder, and he could not possibly go to jail. And Wu Qian's grandmother was in her 60s, and no one dared to touch her age. In the end, after the police coordinated, they paid 5,000 yuan for funeral expenses, which was considered a settlement. I don't know when all this happened, whether Wu Qian was sitting in the corner of the living room, quietly watching her grandmother holding her brother, rolling and crying on the ground, watching her brother get up from the ground, laughing like nothing happened. When we went to the detention center for a physical examination, we found that Wu Qian had old injuries to her hymen, scars from cigarette burns, and bruises on her forehead. Wu Qian did not answer us where these injuries came from, but the only one who smoked around her was her grandfather. I remember, the first time we went to find Wu Qian's grandmother asked us what we were doing. I said police. Wu Qian's grandmother sneered, and said sarcastically, "Yo, wearing official clothes is amazing." The second time we visited her home, we found that Wu Qian's grandmother pretended to be sick and did not let the children go to school, and we reminded her a few words while visiting. Wu Qian's grandmother rolled her eyes and said, "Then will you take care of me when I'm sick?" I was so angry that my head hurt. I looked at her white hair, thought about my bank card balance, counted that neither the criminal law nor the civil law stipulated that the old lady could not pretend to be sick, and had to leave with a sullen head. At that time, Wu Qian was also standing next to her, watching quietly. I know Wu Qian must be an exception. No matter what, not everyone can swing a hammer at a fellow human being with a blank face. After Wu Qian was arrested, some children in the village told us afterwards that they had seen her set fire to rats, and this girl was always abnormal. I was just wondering, this exception, whether it ever had a chance to be controlled, to be deterred, or even to be educated, to be changed? A year after the incident, I passed by Baigua village on a case, and happened to encounter the final trial of the case, so I took a look. Jing Xiuquan was sentenced to death, and Wu Qian was sentenced to 12 years in prison. It was a very empty trial. The only few spectators, all sat in the plaintiff's seat, were the relatives of the victims, and there was no one behind Jing Xiuquan and Wu Qian. I didn't watch the whole scene, and I was hurriedly called away by work during the recess. When I went out, I remembered that it was a sunny day. The first time I talked about this case, Sanguine kept saying, "Too weird," a torture that even the forensic doctors couldn't bear to look at, and there was a child who was powerless among the murderers. But after handling more extreme cases, he had to admit that the more extreme the cases, the more the murderers resembled children. They are like children, angry and vengeful when they can't get what they want, but children only cry, and they can wield butcher knives. Are there born criminals in the world? Sanguine's answer to this question is that he thinks human nature is evil, and correction afterwards is the most important. Law, humility, compassion, are things that need to be repeatedly educated to achieve. Believing that human nature is evil does not mean pessimism, but tells us how hard it is to grow up, and how necessary it is.